Hello, I'm Emily Morson. I am a contributing blogger to Kind Theory. I am neurodivergent and a writer. Today, I have Jamie Shields joining me. We are going to talk a little bit about what accessibility means to him and how we can make the world a more accessible place. So briefly, Jamie is Kind Theory's accessibility consultant. He describes himself as a registered blind ADHD rhino because rhinos are just chubby unicorns with bad eyesight.
That is so true.
You even have a shirt with that on it, don't you?
I do, and if anyone can see my background, there's rhinos like all along my background. I'm obsessed with rhinos. They're my hyperfocus.
Ah, yes. I love the display, and looks like you're a Star Wars fan too.
Oh, another hyperfocus.
All right. So I understand you wear many hats. You're a speaker, educator, consultant, freelancer, podcaster, blogger. What all else do you do?
What don't I do would probably be the better question. So yeah, I do a lot of speaking, and I kind of share my lived experiences of being the intersectional lived experiences of being a blind, neurodivergent, gay, Northern Irish man. So it's a lot of sharing of my lived experiences, and then I work full time alongside doing my own. I call it side hustle because I think side hustle when you're full time employed makes your employer feel a bit more safer. So it's like, we're not losing you, it's not a business, but it's a side hustle, but we know it's a business. So it's like tiptoeing around language. What don't I do? Like, honestly, it's like if somebody comes to me and says, can you do this? I'll try, but if I can't do it, I'll like, okay, let's try this person instead. So yeah, I think I'm making up for lost years where I didn't really share my lived experience or knew what accessibility was myself. I knew I had challenges, but I didn't know how to articulate that.
So how did you learn about accessibility and realize that was your thing?
When I was born registered blind, so I was, and I didn't find out I was neurodivergent till quite later in life. Like, when I say quite later, I've only been self-diagnosed a year. I had my official diagnosis at the start of this year. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and the psychiatrist who diagnosed me said, "You're textbook ADHD, but you're definitely ASD as well, and I can't give you the assessment because you didn't pay for it because I went private." And now she's referred me on, so I'm now in the middle of going through that assessment. And for me, it was like, I've always been disabled. I knew from day dot with my eyesight that there was challenges, there was barriers, and whenever I tried to articulate or speak to my mum or my teachers or even friends, nobody really got it, and nobody could tell me why I was facing these barriers or how to overcome them. And I think that's a problem in society in itself, is that we don't give young disabled and neurodivergent people information about accessibility at a young age, so it kind of gives them the power to go into a room and say, I need this, I need you to speak to me this way. I didn't have that, and I didn't really have that most of my life. Like, I struggled with education, I struggled with employment, and it wasn't just because I was registered blind, it was because I didn't know I was neurodivergent. I was navigating a neurotypical world, and whenever I was coming up against these inaccessible barriers, I call them barriers because that's exactly what they are. The big barriers that stop us being able to engage and participate. And I didn't really understand why I wasn't able to engage, participate. And with my neurodivergent brain, I would get really frustrated at myself, like really frustrated. I'd call myself stupid. It's your fault you're experiencing this. And that kind of mentality of imposter syndrome, that it's our fault, and that internalized ableism kind of raises its head. So I got really frustrated and was just like, I'm done. I'm just done with working. I'm done with everything. And then I actually landed a job, which was my full-time employer now, working in recruitment. And for the first time in my life, there was a power shift where, rather than me having to say, I need this support, and almost being challenged, saying, no, we can't do that, we can't do X, Y, Z. For the first time in my life, it was, well, what do you need us to do to support you? So it was a complete power dynamic for me, and it completely flipped the table. So in the past 4 years, it's like I'm making up for lost time of not being able to speak about these barriers, and I'm slowly, over the past 32 years, I know I don't look over 18, but in the last 32 years, it's like I finally found my voice. I'm like Ariel in The Little Mermaid. You know, when she gets her voice back and she can't stop singing, That's like me in accessibility. It's like now I know what it is and I have the words and I know what my challenges are. It's like, good luck, you're not going to stop me speaking about it. It's not my buzzword.
That is so relatable. I also was diagnosed as an adult, and in my case, even though my parents are also neurodivergent, almost certainly, they didn't have a concept of what neurodivergence was or what any disability that not that was invisible was really.
Yep.
So I had to figure out a lot of things for myself about what I needed, and I'm still figuring things out over 10 years later.
There'll never be an end goal with that. Like, you'll always be figuring that out. And I think that's something I've realised. I think because I've been disabled with my eyesight, I kind of say I feel like I've had like a trial run of what it's like to be disabled in a society. And I know that's a really terrible way of looking at my lived experience, but it's like I already know what it feels like to be excluded. So being neurodivergent on top of that, it wasn't anything near different in that sense. It just meant I now understood my brain, but it's like I thought I would have the answers. It's like you think you get your diagnosis and like, yes, this is going to figure it all out for me. I'm going to know what way people need to communicate with me. I'm going to know how to do X, Y, Z, and I'm going to follow my routines and put structures in place and reframe. But you don't. It's like you think you get the key. It's like getting the key to your life. But in the process of getting this key to your life, it's like you have to play unwrap the parcel. So like the party game, pass the parcel, and each time it stops and somebody they wrap away another piece. That's what finding out you're neurodivergent is as an adult. It's like you're unwrapping piece of this parcel, but the parcel is your experience, it's your trauma, it's your past, it's your challenges, it's your relationships. Because you mentioned your parents, if you're neurodivergent, somebody in your household, your mum and dad, or somewhere in that family tree, there is neurodivergence, particularly around ASD as well. Like, I know I'm autistic now, and it took me a few months to even be able to say that word. But I spoke to my mum and dad about it, and they were like, "You're not autistic. You were well behaved." And all these casebook stereotype examples of the lack of knowledge that was back then. Because I don't blame my parents. I'm sure you don't blame your parents for the lack of awareness. It's a different time. It's a new generational learning that we're taking in, where we recognise actually ADHD isn't that child throwing a tantrum. Autism isn't a child who can't communicate. It's actually a diversity of thinking and of traits and behaviours. And yes, there's shared experiences, but we're all navigating ourselves. So my mum has been in this journey with me, almost in a sense, and I've watched her mind unravel as she learns more about me. And even when it comes to accessibility, the way she communicates to me, because that's accessibility, people forget this. The way that we communicate is accessibility. It's making sure that if I'm speaking to Jamie, I know that Jamie likes to get meetings after his notes. I know that Jamie doesn't like to use big words because his brain does not take it well. But it's it's finding out what way works for that person, and that's essentially what my mum was doing. And she's realising in herself, it's like, oh my goodness, that's me. And I'm like, that was me 2 years ago when I realised.
That's so exciting. It must be amazing to see her going on this journey with you.
100%. Although she'll not go for the official diagnosis, because my mum's one of these people, I think self-diagnosis will be enough for her. And like, to be honest, I've already got enough people on this journey with me, because as soon as I got diagnosed, my partner got diagnosed with ADHD and with ASD. It was like, oh my god, this is why we're so compatible. It was very strange. And then my best friend has also gone through the process. And there's this saying that neurodivergent people, we typically hang around with each other. We feel comfortable. It's like we can take the mask that we have on in society. And now I'm looking at all my circle. It's not a big circle, but I'm like, oh, you're neurodivergent. You might be neurodivergent. Are you neurodivergent? And it's you kind of really start to see into that there that, do you know what? This could be true. We are very able to unmask when we're people we feel comfortable with. So maybe that's somebody's neurodivergent because they get it.
That's been my experience too. At this point, all the friends I speak with regularly are neurodivergent. So, speaking of communication, I thought it might be nice to jump in and ask you a little bit more about accessibility. First of all, what does accessibility mean to you? You've talked about communication a little bit.
Yeah. So accessibility it's such a buzzword at the moment. Everybody's talking about it, and there's been this gap of knowledge for what accessibility actually is, because people confuse it with usability, how somebody uses something or engages, and it's like it's not the same. But there's similarities, but it's not the same. And so companies are talking about being inclusive, but don't have a clue what accessibility is. And for me, accessibility is about creating an equal and equitable experience for everybody. So for anyone who doesn't know the difference between equality and equity, equality, the way that I kind of rephrase this is, equality is everybody getting a shoe. And equity is making sure that shoe fits. It's recognizing that we all have different needs, we all have different backgrounds, we all have different social background standings. All this whole there's a whole difference behind each of us, and it's recognizing that each person needs their own individual support. So if you're disabled, it could be adjustments. It could be, if you are neurodivergent, it could be again adjustments around communication. It's very individual, so it's creating an equal and equitable experience. So users, whatever they are, users, customers, connections, followers, clients, candidates, you name it. So 18, sorry, let me just make sure I get the stat right. It's making sure that the 1.8 billion people with disability can engage and participate. And I'm not saying every disabled or neurodivergent person needs accessibility, because some of us do not. But the likelihood is, as we get older, as we age, our accessibility we actually do need it a little bit more. Whether that be a Zimmer frame to help you get about, whether it be a wheelchair to help you get about, or mobility car, scooter, we all age, and disability and accessibility impacts us in a different way. And I think another thing that's really important to remember is that 80% of people have acquired disability later in life. So only 20% of us were born with the disabilities. I was born with my eyesight, but then, well, I didn't really acquire because I didn't go out and catch it like a Pokemon, but, I found out later in life, oh wait, I was neurodivergent, so I was part of that 80% as well. And this is why I think everybody has a responsibility to have at least an inkling, an understanding of accessibility, because it's recognizing the difference that is humanity. We're all so different. Everybody, whether it be a mother with a child in a pram, she needs a ramp to get up in the curb, or if it's a father, he needs a ramp to get up in the curb. There's all these different ways that accessibility impacts us. But for the disabled community, it's making sure that your products, your services, your content, your marketing, that it represents us and that we can engage. And there's so many different ways that can be done. It can be adding alt text to images. It can be having accessible buildings, which has lifts that actually work. It's being able to have staff who understand how to speak to somebody who is neurodivergent or who is non-verbal or autistic. It's making sure that we are taking accountability for accessibility and our own accessibility, our own content, our own organisations, and our own learning. Because, as I said, 80% of us have acquired disability later in life. And most of us, if not 99.99% of the planet, will experience temporary disability at some point. So accessibility may not impact you today, but it may impact you tomorrow, or a friend, or a family member. And it's making sure that everybody can engage. I took you down a rabbit hole there, but I hope I answered it.
You did. It's hard because in some ways it's so simple, right? Making sure that everybody can participate and is represented. And in other ways it's so difficult because, as you say, there are so many ways to do it. Kind theories focusing on challenging ableism, amplifying autistic perspectives, and building understanding and acceptance. So in that context, which is a little bit narrower, what does accessibility mean to you?
Yeah, so as an autistic individual, it's so unique to each person, and I think this is the point. If you're going to take anything away from this, it's individual. Always ask the person if they need extra support, or if they need adjustments, or if they need any accessible way of communicating. But accessibility can come in many forms. You have your physical accessibility, which is, as I said, your buildings and how you enter buildings. You have your online accessibility, which is your website, your content. And then you also have your accessibility of your recruitment processes. So for autistic and neurodivergent individuals, I would say accessibility means that we can navigate a society that is designed for a neurotypical person. So somebody who is not neurodivergent. It is a society that's been designed for somebody who is neurodivergent or autistic. It isn't designed. And it's making sure that you recognise that the typical way, or the norm, I don't know, inverted commas, of communicating isn't what we need. there's a lot more effective ways that we can communicate with individuals, by using simpler language, by writing clear instruction, by making sure that we provide a statement saying if you need an additional way to contact us or if you prefer to speak to us. It's offering different ways to communicate. And I watched a TED Talk recently, and it was this lady, Merle Evans. She is deaf and she is from the US. And she has said, always look for 3 ways to communicate with somebody. And I think about this in my work in accessibility quite a lot. And particularly if you're an autistic individual, not every autistic individual feels comfortable speaking over the phone. We don't want to, not all of us want to have that conversation. I personally do because I'm a chatterbox. You can't get me to shut up. But equally, there's people who aren't who are more non-verbal or who maybe don't feel comfortable speaking to strangers or people they don't know. So it's then maybe looking at maybe having an email so they can email you or they can web chat you. And then the third way, sorry, let's say that was email. Okay, so that's email. And then the third way is to do it live, like text messages, or to use web chat, like online live chats. Having different ways that people can communicate. Because waiting for an email, there's restrictions with that. You're waiting for a reply. If you're autistic, sometimes that impatience for waiting for something, I have no patience. Like, if I want something, I wanted it yesterday, and if I don't have it, I throw a tantrum. Not a tantrum, because that's not the right word. I get so overwhelmed, and to the outside world, it looks like I'm having a tantrum, but in my head, I can't function because I can't see straight. It's like somebody's broken the pattern or the routine that I need in my head, and it's like everything becomes all blurred. So for me, I think about this TED Talk a lot. It's about communicating 3 different ways. And when I apply that to neurodivergent and autistic people, it's recognising, offer as many ways as possible. Don't worry about 3. Offer as many ways as possible for us to engage and participate. Make sure you're using simplified language. Stop using acronyms and job descriptions and abbreviations. Talking to job descriptions, can we also move away from giving like the complete opposite advice? My brain is very regulated. If I read something and the next line counteracts it, it's like, what? The whole thing gets cancelled out. And what I mean by that is companies that say, you need to work by yourself, but you also need to be able to work as part of a team. Now, I know that's like nearly 99% of job descriptions, but it's so contradictory. It's like, am I working alone or am I not working alone? And I think, again, bringing it back to the conversation before we go down a rabbit hole, is when you are thinking about neurodivergent or people who are autistic, just recognise that we are all individual. If we tell you something's not accessible to us or we need a different way of communicating, don't put the onus back on us. Don't make us responsible for it. You are the organisation. You're the individual who has to take accountability for this. And it's not challenging us by saying, well, you don't look autistic. You don't look that, because that's ableist. And for me personally, and this is the last thing I'll say on this because I really have taken you into Alice in Wonderland territory here down the rabbit hole. The last thing I'll say is, when we think about accessibility, we tend to think of it as very singular. It's like this one thing. But it's not. Just like disability and neurodiversity, it's so diverse, so it is. But by having that really open conversation and being able to create accessible content or jobs and things like that, we're actually acting less ableist. Because ableism is treating disabled or neurodivergent people than less. And if something's not accessible from the get-go, you've already treated us like less.
Very good point. And I really appreciate the examples of the many different ways that we can communicate more accessibly. I do think, like, as with curb cuts, communicating in multiple different ways will benefit everyone.
100%. It's like, honestly, if you want to check out a TED Talk, Merle Evans, and it's even in person too. Like, if you're with somebody and somebody's non-verbal, why aren't you using your phone or a notepad to write to that person? Like, we all have a phone on us 24/7. Like, there's so many ways to communicate, and sometimes it's just asking that person, what's your preferred communication style?
Very good point. What do you find yourself advising people most often when it comes to making sure people communicate in an accessible way and include autistic people by design?
So, I hope some of my clients might hear this and know I'm talking about them. But if you're listening, it's really not about you. This is one of the biggest things I get around accessibility is, well, how's our staff going to know? How are we going to know how to speak to somebody who's autistic? How are we going to know how to speak to somebody who has ADHD? How are we going to know how to speak to that blind man applying? Or what do we do if it's somebody who's intersectional and is blind, ADHD and ASD? me. We can add in those intersectional lived experiences, and when you think of it that way, I think it's really important to. My response is typically, why would you be afraid to speak to somebody who's different? We're all different. You speak to somebody different every day. Some of our communication is just more non-verbal than others. Some of us use sign language. Some of us speak in different languages. Some of us communicate through Makaton. There's all these different ways that people communicate, and it's like there's no set one right or wrong way. But the one thing that we can all agree on, whatever way you're communicating, you need to make sure that accessibility is at the heart of it, that you're willing to change what you're doing, that you're willing to take action to learn. And that's my response to my clients is well, educate your staff, implement training, bring in autistic individuals, or whatever you're discussing in work, bring those people in with real lived experience. Stop listening to so-called experts, and I do that in inverted commas, of people who don't have lived experience. There's no experience like lived experience. You could bring my doctor into a room, my eye doctor, who could tell you all about my sight condition from a medical point, which is really, I'm not going to say it's dull in case anybody is really into medical, but for me, the medical term for my eyesight is ocular albinism with nystagmus. Now that sounds like an absolute mouthful, but when I tell somebody I'm the same as an albino and my eyes like to go for little dances, that's a lot simpler to understand. So it's bringing the people with a lived experience who can educate you and let you see the world through their lens. You want to understand how autistic people work, operate in your workplace, or feel in your company cultures. Ask them. You have individuals who you employ. Speak to the people in the organisation. If you don't, go find a company. Come to Kind Theory. I'm sure they have plenty of people who can come and support you. There's so much talent and people out there willing to share their lived experiences. Kind of push it back, well, we don't know how to engage with disabled or neurodivergent or autistic individuals, isn't really an answer in 2023. And if you are a company who is saying that, you're talking the talk about being inclusive, because you cannot consider yourself inclusive if you're not considering every marginalised group, not just women in work, not just ethnicity, not just, so I said gender, not just LGBTQ+. You have to consider this whole spectrum, because we are all intersectional beings. We don't fit into one neat box. We fit into multiple boxes, and our experiences are unique to us. So bring us in, let us educate you, and listen. Listen with intent. Just don't listen for the sake of it. Really do stop and listen, and take that advice.
Pausing for a second. I'm pondering what you're saying, because that really is inspiring. Between
I don't even know what I said. I just confessed. I don't even know what I said.
So yes, between you and me, I'm always wishing people would ask me more questions, because it's a sign that they respect you enough to figure that you know and can share what you need, right?
And you know what? It's even being asked that one question. It's like, what do you need? What do you need? Like, that's complete partnership, because we don't get that. We fight so much to get our voice across, to get across the table, or be invited to the table, that when that question's asked us, it's like, what do you mean? Suddenly somebody cares, somebody sees me as an adult, somebody sees that this isn't as straightforward for me, and I think that's just a really empowering moment as a disabled and neurodiverse person, because it's so rare and far between that it happens. Which is sad. It's sad, but we're getting better. I think society's getting better. I slowly but sure, it's like one step forward and two steps back, but we're still going forward.
That's good to hear. I have a similar impression, but there are so many different sorts of workplaces, and so many people are needing to learn so many different things.
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? In my lifetime, I've had probably 30 plus jobs in my lifetime. That sounds a lot. Like, that's nearly a job a year for my 32 years. But out of those employers, there's only one employer that I've worked in where I actually felt like I belonged. That things were accessible, things were inclusive. There's lists out there of companies that are named the most inclusive employers or the most diverse employers, and you see this and you think, wow, this is going to be amazing for me. I'm going to feel such belonging. But then you get in there and you realise this is all a smokescreen, because you don't understand that I communicate differently. You don't understand that, you know what, being autistic or neurodivergent, it's not a limitation. We're thinking differently. We bring diversity. We bring a diverse train of thought, ways that you probably never would have looked at. And it's like that shift is the problem, because we have spent, there's a cycle in the world of inclusion where we have all spent, including charities and NGOs and even government organisations, we've all spent this whole time talking about accessibility. But none of these people actually in these positions will ever actually understand. And it's like this has been a cycle for many years. And that's the problem, is we've talked about inclusion, but we forgot to be inclusive. You need to be accessible. And without accessibility, you're just talking a talk about inclusion. I took you down a rabbit hole there.
No, you're giving me a lot to think about. And I have to say, it's amazing how simple it can be to make communication accessible, right? Finding out what each person needs.
It sounds simple, like when we say, and this is why I feel so passionately about my work, because when you go and look about accessibility online, like if you went and looked at the web content accessibility guidelines, that is like, it's like reading back to front language. You're sitting going, I don't understand, and your brain melts away. And I think that when we have individuals speaking about the lived experience, we are able to take our lived experience and make it relatable to people. Right, and it comes back to the starter's call where we talked about relatability, and it's being able to relate. And when you can relate to a situation, you can see yourself in it. And it's the same with empathy. Empathy works the same way. You know, if you're telling somebody about your lived experience and you tell them about a barrier, that person's more likely to care. And I'm not saying you need to do an X Factor, do a sob story, but when you make somebody aware and they're actually able to get behind it, that changes the dynamic again, because people are then thinking, oh, this could be my friend, this could be my family member, this could be me one day. And it's about that connection. It's connecting those dots. And I think with lived experience, we're able to do that so well.
I understand that in practice you work a lot with digital content, and I'm wondering if you have any examples of favorite content that is really accessible to autistic people. You know, what does that look like?
Yeah, so in accessibility, there's this principle what's called universal design, which means design everything accessible from the beginning, and it reduces the need for others to face inaccessibility. Now, it's not saying that when you design something it's going to be accessible for everyone, because nothing's ever going to be as truly accessible to everyone, because again, it might be the wrong language, it might be in the wrong colour contrast. Even though you can check colour contrast, people are still colourblind. Colour contrast does not check for that for you. So it's thinking about when you're creating something, it's for content specifically. I always say, I'm trying to think of the acronym here, I don't want to make it wrong, so I always say use Beachy. So remember this word Beachy, so Beachi. So Beachy. B is for body, so the message body. So with message body, whatever you're posting online, drop acronyms, drop abbreviations. If you're going to use them, make sure you tell us what it means. Use simple language. Do not go into a rabbit hole to tell us your life story when all it needed to say was click here. Do not go through these long journeys with us. And I know it's hard if you're an autistic or neurodivergent person typing it, because every time I write an email it's like, oh, this is not my novel, stop that. It's making sure that you think of that message body, that you also think about messaging. You know, is it clear? Is it simple? Is somebody going to know what I'm talking about, or are they going to need to ask follow-up questions? If somebody needs to ask follow-up questions, your content isn't doing what it needs to do. Next then is E. E is for emojis. Emojis are so much fun, and I think as an autistic person or an neurodivergent people, they can help us communicate our feelings really well. But sometimes I think that when people don't understand what's going on with emojis, they destroy their post with emojis. And if you're somebody who is autistic or neurodivergent, but you're also using a screen reader, that can be an absolute nightmare for your screen reader. Screen readers are assistive technology devices. They're not just used by blind people, they're used by diverse people with a whole range of disabilities and neurodivergence. Some people use them who aren't even disabled or neurodivergent because it helps them in work. So Microsoft have actually built it into their systems now. But emojis ruin screen readers. So if you're using emojis, Limit them, stick them at the end of sentences or at the start of a sentence. Do not replace words, because emojis have their own alt text, which we will touch on in a moment. But alt text essentially is embedded into these emojis. And when you're listening on a screen reader, if you have a hi emoji, so the hi waving hand. So if you have that emoji, it won't say hi, it says waving hand. So that doesn't have the same message. If you're saying, imagine that out, waving hand, my name is. It doesn't make correct English in your head or proper sense. So don't replace words or overuse emojis. So we've got BE. The A is for alt text. Alt text is text that describes an image. And again, it's helping that screen reader user. Alt text creates a mental picture in your head of what an image is, particularly if you can't see it. So again, it's about communicating in different ways. So an image is one thing, it's visual. Alt text is two, it's text embedded, so you won't see it with a naked eye. And the trick with alt text is keep it short, keep it simple. What is this image? What is it trying to say? What is its purpose? So you'll do it like 3 or 4 lines. Do not go into loads of detail with alt text. So that's B-E-A. And then C is your closed captions. So if you're making a video, that video needs to have closed captions. Anyone who doesn't know, closed captions, some people call them subtitles. Closed captions appear on screen as you speak. So it's word by word. And it needs to be done accessibly. C is also for colour contrast. So if you are creating graphics, you need to also consider the colour contrast, the difference between two colours, which kind of does relate back into the captions, because sometimes you see people use closed captions and they're like pink and yellow and it's like, that is not readable, that is going to give me a migraine. So it's thinking about the contrast of your captions, but also the text on images. Is it clear? Is it readable? So it's B-E-A-C, and then H is for hashtags. If you're using hashtags online, they need to be accessible. Use a capital letter for each new word or every new word. So if I was doing a hashtag Monday motivation, Monday would get a capital M and motivation would get a capital M. And again, it supports screen reader users, but also autistic individuals and neurodivergent individuals, because what it does is it makes it easier for us to read. So we're not guessing what that hashtag is. And there's some really terrible examples out there. Go Google bad hashtags and you'll see exactly what I mean. There's been a lot of PR boobies with companies. So that is beach. We spelled beach so far. And the I at the end for the beachy is for your image description. Image description is a little bit like alt text, but it's a little bit longer and more descriptive, and it will always be visible to the naked eye. And the reason for that is not everybody can use a screen reader. I don't know if anyone's ever used one listening to this. They are not easy. As a registered blind person, I've had to use them most of my life, and with my neurodivergent and ASD, I can't cope with the voice of it. And no matter how many seconds I try with it, it's like my brain shuts down when I hear it. So I use it as little as I can. But if you don't have an image description, then I have no choice but to use it. And not everybody can use them. If you're blind and deaf, might not, and you're divergent or autistic, again, that intersectionality, you might not be able to use it. So that is beachy. B-E-A-C-H-I. That was probably a lot.
Yes, but the principle applies to a lot of cases that you didn't discuss. I'm going to try the hashtag one from now on. I didn't know that, and I'm sure I've done more than my share of all lowercase hashtags, so not anymore.
But to be fair, it's not your fault, because it comes back to we live in a neurotypical society. We live in an ableist society. If anyone says our society is not ableist, they need to walk the day in a disabled person's shoes or neurodivergence. We face ableism every day, online, in person. Even when we're communicating with people, the behaviours, the stereotypes, the misconceptions, we spend our life being disabled by a neurotypical society that we become so used to it that we fail to even be able to acknowledge when it's happening at times. And we become so, not that we believe it, but part of it clings on to it, and we foster that, and we become a little bit more ableist ourselves, and we don't recognise how to be more accessible. We don't understand. But it's nobody's fault, because society's made us that way. Our social media platforms aren't built for accessibility. If they were, I wouldn't probably be in a job, because that's where I started doing. I started challenging LinkedIn. I was like, make this platform accessible, please. And then Twitter is the most accessible platform. And then Elon Musk sacked everybody, and now there's no accessibility team, and accessibility is went out the window. But it's like, this is the society we live in. It's a disabling, neurotypical society, and we don't even teach people how to be accessible in education. We still segregate disabled and neurodivergent kids in education, and then we wonder why we grow up being excluded and wanting for our voices to be heard, because no one's listened to us for most of our life, except our parents and friends who know us.
There's so much we need to do. I guess a lot of people still think that it's going to take too much time or effort or inconvenience or whatever to include people with disabilities, and that really is not always the case, and it really depends on the individual. So
100%. And like my response, because I get this a lot, like I hear, again, my clients are going to hear this. If anyone listens to this and they hear this, it's not a dig, but I've heard people say, well, it costs too much money to be accessible, or it takes too much time to train our staff, or it takes too much time to create an accessible post online. And my response is always, well, there's a few things the way that statement's wrong. One, when you compare those extra few minutes to creating accessible content or accessible marketing or documents, compare that to a lifetime of inaccessibility, and look a disabled or neurodivergent or autistic person in the face and tell them this takes too long. Because what actually takes too long is the patience it takes from us, that when we go online, that every second third post or every second third job we can't apply for because it's not accessible. So yes, it may take you a little bit longer, but it takes us weeks and months to recover from being excluded. And we fight that our whole life, and we carry baggage around. As well as that there, yes, it can cost more money when you start accessibility late in the process. So if you're a big company and you've suddenly decided you're going to make your website accessible, you best believe that's going to be expensive, because it is expensive when you have hundreds of pages that need redone. So if you're starting out, it's always cheaper. But yes, it's expensive, but you know what's more expensive? Court cases. Court cases when you break the law by not creating accessible products or websites. And there's this rise, I was trying to think of the right word here, but there's a rise in accessibility lawsuits, particularly in the US, in the past number of years, and it's because we've had enough. During the pandemic, when we were all locked away, we all had to move online, and disabled and neurodivergent and autistic individuals really realised, you know what, this actually is not good enough anymore, and we started talking about it, and we've created groups and we've created companies and we've grouped together and we're saying this can't happen no more. So yes, it can be expensive, but compare that to the court case that you're going to get, because it is rising. And also on accessibility, if you're one of those companies who say, well wait, we are accessible because we have an overlay, those little accessibility buttons on websites, and you click it, you can change the options. That's a lie. You're being sold a lie. If a company is using that, that is not going to protect you from the law. Just ask some of those companies like AudioEye, who's been to court. They're the companies that provide them. They've been to court. They don't win because it only fixes 20 to 30% of website accessibility issues. And when you think that 98% of the world's top 1 million websites aren't fully accessible, it's like, what are we doing? We need to wake up now.
okay, I've got to ask, what sort of problems do these accessibility buttons not address?
So basically, when you have, again, it comes back to onus. If you're telling a disabled person or neurodivergent autistic person that when they come onto your website, you need to click this button and then click through these settings to get accessibility, you're putting the onus on that person to take steps to remove the barrier. That's not what inclusion is. That's giving a disabled person extra steps. Now, when you also think about a website, some of these website overlays will change the font. They will change the contrast, which sounds really amazing in theory, but it doesn't address the accessibility in the website code. So if I can't use my mouse and I have to use my tab button. So some people just use the tab button on the keyboard. Some people just use eye movement to make their computer move. Like, there's all different sorts of technology. But in this case, if I can't tab through your website, that's not accessible. It also doesn't write alt text. It does not caption your videos. It does not leave image descriptions. And it does not check for color contrast. The biggest fail with websites is colour contrast issues, which means you cannot read text on the website. So it's a lie. Companies have been sold a lie. And I know it sounds really harsh because lie is a terrible word, but it's true. These companies will promise for a monthly subscription, not prescription, that's my doctor, a monthly subscription, it's like a couple of, actually it's about 50 to £100 a month, or dollars, and these companies are paying this thinking, we're safe, we're ADA compliant, we're Section 508 compliant, and they're all singing, all dancing. And then along comes a lawsuit, and Beyonce Knowles actually had one, so I love Beyonce, so just a shout out to Beyonce. Beyonce actually had one because her images on her website didn't have alt text, and people didn't know what they were buying. So it's, yes, there's a gap in the knowledge because we haven't been taught it, but it's expensive to come back to. So do not fall for those lies. Make your website fully accessible from day one. And if you want to offer an individual choice after a website is universally accessibly designed, then go for it. Pay that additional cost, but first pay to get your website actually made accessible before adding anything on top.
Thank you for that.
No worries at all.
Thank goodness these companies have you to tell them they can't rely on these accessibility buttons and they need to do things better. Since we all live in a society that doesn't think to ask what people need who use a screen reader or who access the internet through eye movements, since we live in a society where people don't think to ask about that, what's the most effective way to learn about disabilities that we don't have ourselves and how to make the content we create more accessible, especially if we're not programmers or incredibly tech savvy ourselves?
100%. Like, I gotta be honest, I'm terrible in tech. Like, I am terrible. I rage quit tech. Like, I throw my phone across the room more times a day than I probably eat. Like, I just have no patience. It's like, no, get this away from me. I think the biggest thing is we live in the age where social media plays such a fundamental part in all of our lives. So much time every day, wasted time, granted, is spent on social media, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. There is people out there who are sharing their lived experiences. There is blogs being shared. Kind theory, you all create blogs. We all write different things for it. This is the information out there that needs to be visible. This is the information that if you don't have the lived experience, that you need to be going and witnessing and reading and engaging and supporting. Because when I think about accessible content, I always bring it back to, yes, we've not learned this in school. In fact, if you're a programmer or a marketer, you don't even learn about accessibility. This is an additional learning people have to do, so it's not even part of the syllabus for them. And that's a problem in itself. We have built our societies up where we don't have the education. So the ownership is on us, is to go follow those creators, go take courses. If you're an organisation, you need to make courses around inclusion and accessibility. And as I said, include people with lived experience. The work that I do with my full-time employer, we had an issue where people didn't really know about different diverse disabilities or neurodivergence. And we were thinking, what is one impactful way that we can educate people about this? So we created a series of videos, what was called the I Am video series, and it's different colleagues saying, I am autistic, I am registered blind, I am ADHD, I am PTSD, whatever the lived experience was. And we've shared this internally, and it's quick 10-minute videos, and it's like bite-sized, digestible information. So if a manager has somebody in their team who is autistic and they don't really know, what can I do? Well, here's somebody with lived experience sharing what's worked for them in the workplace. So it's about awareness. It's making ourselves more aware. And once we become aware and we take that ownership and we learn, it's like everything in life. No one's expecting you to get it overnight. It will be a constant learning. Because with accessibility, sadly, there's no end goal. Because technology changes, language changes, and as that evolves, so must accessibility. And if you don't know how, listen or ask. There is no such thing as a silly or stupid question.
I will not be afraid to ask. And I hope our viewers will look into those videos you mentioned. I'm definitely going to be looking them up after this.
They're not shared externally, they're internal. But every organisation can make them. This is it. It's like anybody can make these videos. Video is such a powerful message. It's like we go to concerts to see people speaking. We now do that with webinars and panel discussions online, and there is so much power there, particularly as you can now sit at home and take notes as you're learning. It's it's opened up the world, and I think that the more video that we put out there that show this off, the better. Just make sure the videos are fully accessible, that you have captions and you have a transcript. It's just it's thinking of different ways that we can educate people. Because again, how do we communicate this lived experience if somebody doesn't have it? Video is one means, pictures, text, blogs, websites, whatever it is, there's so many ways to communicate this, but it all starts with learning.
How can people reach you if they have more questions, which I'm sure they will, because we've touched on many, many issues, and there are even more that I kept thinking, we need to have another conversation about this.
So you can get me, you can reach out to any of the team at Kind Theory, they can divert you across to me. You can check out my LinkedIn, it's just my name, Jamie Shields. Equally, you can email me at info@disabledbysociety. But honestly, either way, I've thought there, but maybe, who knows, maybe we'll do a Kind Theory accessibility course and open it up to everybody, and I don't know, maybe try to charge everybody for that, or give it for free, I don't know.
Something like that could be wonderful.
100%. And like I've just actually designed a course that I'm going to be releasing next month around accessible content, which is taking quite a long time. But yes, I'm going to have my own website soon, but I'll not give that away because I don't know how it looks shit, and I don't want to give it away in case it's good. But check back.
Good. We'll have to check that out when it comes out. What sort of parting advice would you like to leave us with?
I think we've covered a lot here today, but I think we've been remiss to not have mentioned the kind of ableism and inaccessibility that comes from, not even just the medical side, but even from your own GPs and doctors. There's a lot of talk at the moment around how neurodiversity or being autistic or ADHD is a new trend, and everyone's jumping on this bandwagon. And I think doctors are also kind of jumping on this too. When I went to my doctor and told them I thought I was neurodivergent, I got told, no, you can't be. You're too high functioning. But what does that mean? You don't know what way my brain is. You don't know that I sit at home and panic all the time over certain things, or the way that my brain jumps. It's like constantly having different TV channels on or movies on. And so for me, it's about, there needs to be a societal shift in recognising what ableism is, because I am a firm believer that we need to be able to challenge ableism. And there is so much ableism that exists within the medical community around disability. They still use the medical model of disability to refer to us. A person with autism. No, I'm an autistic person. Person with disability. No, I say I'm a disabled person because society disables me. It's the neurotypical society that is disabling me. It's the ableist attitudes. It's the ableist beliefs. It's telling us that we are less than, when actually our thinking is more than, that we are already proven problem solvers. We are already proven that we can overcome challenges. So for me, we need to call out ableism at all levels, because inaccessibility, as I said, is ableist at its core.
If anybody in the audience is part of the medical profession, there is definitely a lot to think about there in regards to making sure people have access to care and making sure that they can communicate with their doctors. That could be a whole other conversation in itself, right?
100%.
Perhaps we should even have that one. I hear complaints all the time from the chronic illness support group I've been a part of. There's a whole area of medical writing that exists to help bridge this gap between the medical profession and people who use normal language. And they use something called plain language, which is a way of expressing complex ideas in the simplest possible language, right?
Yeah.
Yes, something that I'm learning how to do myself, and can make things a lot more cognitively accessible for neurodivergent people.
That's it. Just ask us, what way can we communicate with you? I have had so many letters from my doctors in my 32 years. I've never been able to read one of them because I'm registered blind. There needs to be, I think it all comes back to that onus, isn't it, of accountability. The medical profession has to take accountability for their part to play. The media has to take accountability of their part. Organisations who are working in different sectors and markets, we all have to take accountability, but we have to meet somewhere in the middle. And for me, that middle is universal design. It's making sure that we're designing things accessibly, because not only if you're entering a space and something's accessible, will you be more inclined to talk about your lived experience or to share that lived experience, but it also kind of gives you hope. It's hope that there is change coming, and that's to me what accessible design does. It makes us more comfortable to say, actually, can I get an adjustment here because this isn't working? Actually, can you send me a letter with that because I won't retain this information. Accessible design or universal design is where we meet in that middle, but we need to also put in the middle that intersectionality. We're not just an autistic person, we're not just a neurodivergent person, we're not just a disabled person. We have intersectional diverse lived experiences behind us. Recognise, support, and always act with equity. So always recognise the same shoe's not going to fit everybody.
Thank you, Jamie.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me. And sorry for the rabbit holes.
It happens.
Oh, 2 neurodivergent people on camera. It has to happen.
2 neurodivergent people anywhere.
True. Very true.
We both have ADHD and have a tendency to go down rabbit holes, I think.
In Narnia or Alice in Wonderland.